episode number 216 of the Wholesome Fertility Podcast. My guest today is Rosanne Austin. Rosanne and I hit it off immediately, as you'll be able to see in the episode. But she is just so much fun, and I'm really excited to have her on. She's a fellow podcaster, and she's a 2-time bestselling author and creator of the Fearlessly Fertile Method. What I find fascinating about Rosanne is that she's a former state prosecutor turned fertility fairy godmother. Rosanne overcame her own 7-year struggle with fertility and had her son naturally at almost 44, when medicine had given up on her, and she's committed to helping women get and stay pregnant. With her books, podcasts, online courses, and retreats, Rosanne helps her clients become the mom they were meant to be. She resides in the Woodlands, Texas, with her husband, son, 2 chihuahuas, and 2 formerly feral cats. Welcome to the Wholesome Fertility Podcast. I'm Michelle, a fertility acupuncturist, here to provide you with resources on how to create a wholesome approach to your fertility journey. Welcome to the podcast, Rosanne.
Well, thank you for having me, Michelle. I'm super excited to chat with you.
Me too. So from one podcaster to the next, I'd love for you to introduce yourself and give us a background on your story.
Well, my name is Rosanne Austin, and I am, people ask me all the time what it is that I do. And I used to say fertility coach, but really I'm like, that means a lot of things. But what I do is I really help women think, believe, and take action like women who succeed on this journey. So mindset is my piece of the puzzle, because as you know, there's a constellation of things that come together to help women support their fertility. And my bit is mindset.
I love mindset. I think it's everything. I feel like if you can just pin that down, if you can figure that out and really, really hack it, you don't need anything else. I feel like everything else is like secondary.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny because it's interesting to me when I first started my journey, because the other thing that your listeners should know is that what we're going to be talking about and what I learned, I didn't just learn it from reading a book. I learned it from living it, because before I started doing what I have been doing for the past 8 years, I was a state prosecutor in California. Mm-hmm. So I prosecuted adult and child sexual assault crimes. Oh, wow. And at that time, I was in my kind of knee deep in my mid and heading straight for my late 30s. And I decided, I'm like, maybe it's time for my husband and I to start having our family, because I'll be 40 soon. And I don't know where I picked up that idea that 40 was evil, or that, it all drops off after 40. But at some point I started really thinking about, having a baby. And I was trying so many different things, Michelle. I was trying every diet, lotion, potion, treatment, driving for hours. There wasn't a treatment I wouldn't try or a spray I wouldn't use. I mean, it was just all over the place. And what was interesting to me is the one thing that I wasn't doing was taking care of my mind. Mm-hmm. I was doing all of those things. I was doing all of those things with the expectation of failing, and also not believing I was worthy of having what I wanted. So mindset, yeah. And it's funny because mindset was this missing piece for me. And so that's kind of how all this started.
It's so many people's stories though, because I have people coming in for acupuncture and they're like, they focus on the baby. And I said, no, it's you. You need wellness. You're important. You matter. And it takes a little bit of time for people to wrap their minds around it. And they come in doing all the quote unquote right things, doing the whole list. And the list is overwhelming and feeling pressure and stress because of the list. So it's like, what's the point of the list if it's going to make you feel so stressed? And it's almost impossible to do every single thing on the list. So eventually you're going to feel like you're failing. And that's not really true. It's unrealistic to begin with.
Right. Right. And it's so interesting to me because, well, look, let's be honest. I mean, way back when I was starting my journey, from where I was at, mindset sounded woo-woo. It sounded intangible. It sounded ridiculous and impractical. And I think around that time, people were here, the movie The Secret, manifesting. People think that, it's just you lay on your couch and you're gonna have a great thought and boom, a baby's gonna fall from the sky. It's like, no, it's not quite like that. That's a very simplified way of describing the power of mindset, but it's easy to blow off. And I did that. I did that for a really, really long time until I basically hit rock bottom. We were $100,000 deep in treatments. I didn't have a life. I was, doing all kinds of crazy things in addition to trying really tough cases. And I just hit a wall. And I said, okay, if I look at this strategically as an intelligent woman, I put my trial attorney cap on for a second and I started looking around. What was the thing that I was neglecting? My diet was immaculate. Gluten didn't pass my lips for years. Dairy, forget it. I was doing all these things. I was living in terror that my feet were too cold. It was all of these things.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wait a minute. I am beating myself up for being imperfect. I'm beating myself up for being greedy. I'm beating myself up for wanting all of the things: love, a career, a baby, purpose, all of this stuff. And when I finally addressed that, I really started working through that. I was like, oh, of course my son isn't coming. Why would he? I'm not ready. And then that's when I started to really start looking at my own belief system. And I was like, oh, okay. And that's when I got pregnant for the very first time. And it sounds insane, but literally within weeks of making that discovery, I finally got pregnant with the last of our embryos that we had on ice. Now, I didn't carry that pregnancy to term, but what I recognized was, okay, something was different. And it wasn't the protocol. It wasn't the clinic. It was me. And then that's when I realized, wow, I'm really onto something here. And then I started really, starting to categorize what I had learned, really started taking notes. And then I started teaching other women what I had learned, and they were getting pregnant left and right. And I'm like, oh, wow, this thing really does work. And then when I turned, I was almost 43, I was like 42 and a half. I finally got pregnant, Michelle, naturally. And this is after 7 years of treatment.
I hear things like that a lot and I see it. It's crazy. It really is crazy because it defies logic. Because you're 7 years later, you're 7 years older than when you first started. Then, if everybody's saying that when you hit past 40, that's too old, because those are the messages we get, the they messages.
These elusive experts that we're hearing,
totally. And so it defies what you would normally think would be the case. And my question to you is, obviously, even people who are realizing that mindset is important, how do you finally get to the point where you're able to implement it? Because that can be hard too. That's a whole other mystery.
Yeah. I love this question that you're asking. And I was thinking a lot about it because I get asked that question all the time. Like, well, how do you finally? So I think it's twofold. I think, first of all, it's coming to a place of humility. And I needed some humbling. I'll be completely honest with you. I was so sure I knew how this boy was coming. I was so sure that I was covering my bases. I was so sure that I knew it all. And I needed to get knocked back. Like, honestly, I really needed that. And that was probably one of the most important things, was to get to a place of humility. Wait a second, I don't know everything. And that's not from a place of chastising yourself. It's truly from a place of having an open heart. Whoa, I don't know everything. And the second thing, I think when people are really looking to make a shift in the way they think, but also implement, is a sense of a deep and abiding conviction that this desire for this child, it's meant for them. And that they're willing to get past the stories and they're willing to get past their own limitations to get to that. So humility, and then a willingness to move past the old story. And another way of saying willingness is curiosity. Like,
yeah, I love that.
Who could I be if I wasn't stuck in fear, doubt, negativity, making myself wrong, competition, jealousy? If I could live my journey from a place that's different from that, what's possible for me? So it's like, even if you have a teeny tiny bit of curiosity, I think you have that spark that's needed to kind of to get out of your own matrix of looking at yourself and this journey and give yourself another possibility.
Yeah, it almost feels like opening a window or a space within your energy, because the energy could be very dense when you're focused on something and you really, really want it so badly.
Right. Well, and I think you bring up a good point about that. Let's talk about the nature of the energy, because when I was knee deep, and look, I couldn't be bothered. I was like, going from trial to trial. I was driving 2 hours to get to my treatments. And at that point in time, I was living in Northern California. I was driving to San Francisco to have monitoring. I mean, it took over my life.
Yeah.
But at that point, my energy was a place of lack. I was completely operating from lack and scarcity. I wasn't thinking from a place of possibility or abundance. It was just, I don't have this baby. I need to get this baby. It was very getting energy. It was very lack energy. And it wasn't the love that I wanted to lead with. Like, love was somewhere maybe 27th down the list, not because I didn't have it in me. It's because my fear had taken over and I was more focused on what I didn't have versus what I was headed toward. Does that distinction make sense?
It totally makes sense. And what's interesting is that I often see this as an invitation rather than a demand or a command, because sometimes we go for it. It's like, this is what's happening. This is when you're coming. And the truth is, it's kind of like between the couple and the soul of the child, it's a dance and it's an invitation. It's an invite. It's a come in. And I've seen this happen with my patients. I've had a patient that came to me for a year. Same thing. Her doctor was like, you can't do this naturally. You have to do not egg donor, but it was IVF. And she ended up coming for a year. Her period started changing. Things started to feel better. And she started getting into a place of surrendering and allowing, which is really nice to see, because then you see the suffering leave, which is really beautiful. And one day she just came in. It was after COVID. I opened back up and it was during COVID, but when we were able to open up. And so she came in, and the one time she came in, it was right around ovulation, maybe a little bit after. Just something came over her where she spoke to the child, the soul, and she invited her. She said, come, we welcome you with open arms. We love you. And it was kind of an interesting thing because she just like took a moment to ask and to invite the soul. And literally that month she was pregnant.
I believe it. Because think about that shift in energy, an invitation versus, this strong arm robbery, of like, come on, get over here. And and it's funny because the invitation, within the invitation is a kind of confidence, right? Like a kind of an expectation, but a softness about that expectation. Like, okay, you're totally welcome here. And I get that. And it's so funny because you mentioned surrender, and surrender is a critical aspect, I think, of having a strong mindset too, because if you're able to surrender exactly how this child is coming in, the timing through which they come in, you're absolutely free to receive.
It's absolutely true. It really is, because surrendering, actually, it's funny because when you think about surrender, you think about somebody giving up, but it actually takes a lot of courage to surrender.
Amen. Amen. I mean, that's so true. It is so true. And, surrender is also an act of faith. the way that I see it and the way that I teach it to my ladies is like, look, surrender is an act of faith and it's not something you do once. You're probably surrendering you're many times a day. And I think you make a really good point, because it's not giving up at all. I agree with you 100% that it is incredibly courageous that you believe that whatever desire that you have, it at some level is meant for you. So you're willing to lean back and receive it, but also that whatever higher power you believe in, or source energy, whatever you want to call it, but that the power that is giving you this desire, the power that brought you here, is also going to be the power that brings this child in, that connection between the two of you. So I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. I was lucky enough to go to a Dr. Joe Dispenza retreat a couple of weeks ago. It's incredible. And he had talked about, he said, don't worry about the how. Like the second you start thinking about the how, you throw off almost your ability of opening to this quantum field, because you get so into the details and you focus on whatever it is, but then you just let it go. You let it go to the intelligence, the higher intelligence, which we know exists. I mean, because it's the same intelligence that tells your cells what to do, that creates the blueprints of your life and your body and the movement. And we know that when you do get to this place of surrender, this isn't woo-woo anymore. We have data on how meditation, allowing yourself to get into this autonomic rest and digest mode, allows your body to heal. We know that.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. And you and I have that in common, because I went to his event in October in Dallas.
You did?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I went to the Orlando one. So it was very, very close. It was like a month apart.
Cool. No. And it was funny.
It's life-changing.
Because I think you mentioned it, because I was listening to your podcast. I listened and I remember you had made a mention of that. I'm like, oh my gosh, we have it in common. I'm like, so we can speak quantum physics here. We're on the same page about that. But it's so true, though. It's so true. And that's, nobody leaves their work, Michelle, as a prosecutor, unless you're driven, unless you've had some kind of an existential crisis, which my fertility journey was. And when I looked at what was happening for me, I was like, man, I got to share this with other women, because there are other women as lovably type A, control freaky as I am, that need this information, but they need this information delivered in a way that only another type A lunatic can deliver to them. Right? So, because if somebody came to me like, wearing patchouli oil and Birkenstocks, I would have rejected it. Not because I was a judgmental jerk, but it wasn't.
You wouldn't relate.
It wasn't at a frequency that I could hear it. And so I needed to, just the way I began to consume this, like that's my work in the world now, is helping other women who need to hear this. It's interesting, up this year alone, and our last one, our most recent one, I'll say, came in yesterday, like 72 women that I've worked with this year have gotten pregnant by adding this piece of the puzzle. And I'm like, what more do people need to hear, to know? I mean, these are women from ages 28 to 52. And it's like, dude, if you just take a second, I mean, and going back to something you said at the very beginning, which I think is absolutely true, because you, as a professional, when you're helping people through traditional Chinese medicine and you're helping them support their fertility, there's only so much you can do. And you're excellent at what you do. But if you have somebody that's in your practice that isn't taking care of themselves, believes it's never going to happen, doesn't believe they're worthy, I mean, you can only take them so far.
Totally.
Right? And so you need, and I love this work for no matter what modality people are using, whether they're trying to conceive naturally, whether they're doing IVF or whatever, you are the common denominator. So, it's like, more power to you. Do it naturally, do it with IVF, do it with donor eggs, whatever works for you, but work on you.
Yes. I always say you are the one.
Yeah.
It's like, it all comes down to you.
It really does, because when I'm teaching women, I'm always telling them, look, thoughts, beliefs, actions, results. It's logical and linear. You can't get around it.
Mm-hmm.
And your thoughts and beliefs are guiding your choices, and your choices are naturally going to dictate your results because that's what you're taking action based on. So if you are making choices from lack and scarcity, or you're making choices confined by a statistic, right, where you don't have the expectation that, hey, even though I've got a 30% chance at this, well, I'm going to pay attention to the 30% chance that I can, not the 70% chance that I can't, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's really important for women to really get into their bodies, is that I have power here. I mean, you went to the dispenser retreat, you saw people like doing things that had illnesses and pains and all different kinds of things that were happening in their lives, but when they get their mind on board,
Mm-hmm.
boom.
Totally. It's crazy. It really is. And it's funny because you tell people what you saw at Joe Dispenza retreat, they think you're crazy. And then when you meet another person that went, you're like, yay.
Yeah. Well, crazy like a fox.
Yeah.
Because here's the deal. If there are people, and Dr. Bernie Siegel, MD, wrote the foreword to my first book, and he is a cancer surgeon, pediatric surgery as well. And he observed this in his people. He's like, you can give two people the same treatment. The one with the attitude that is like, yeah, I'm going to do this. I'm really making this decision that I'm going to heal. That person gets this result. And then the person that's like, well, they told me I had 6 months to live, I'm going to die right on time.
Mm-hmm.
Right. You see these things in people. I mean, you see this, Michelle, in so many different aspects of our lives, not just in healing,
totally,
but in everything.
Well, the placebo effect, I mean, it's a real legitimate thing. It was to the point where it actually got in the way of researchers. It was looked at as a pain, but it's like, wait a second, like, this is an incredible thing.
Right. And I think that the message truly, as women are listening, is, look, having a strong mindset is not denial. It's discernment.
Mm-hmm.
It's really giving yourself the ability to say, okay, these are all the things that I'm aware of. Okay. I know I'm, maybe in my 40s or whatever. All of these things are true. Maybe you have a high FSH or whatever that happens to be. Okay. All of these things are true. And I have the final say.
Mm-hmm.
It's crazy. I've seen women, and FSH is controlled by the brain. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I just did an interview.
Good point.
That, with a physician that was like, yeah, I see women who are under incredible amounts of stress. They'll have a super high FSH. They go and they start looking at this mindset piece and they bring it down. How does that make sense? Right. It's because you're starting to change what's going on upstairs. And so, the message really for women is to say, hey, take a second. Like when I'm teaching, an introduction to how to look at your mindset, the first thing that I always encourage women to do is take a look at where they are at on their journey today, right? Because most of the time we're living in the past, as you well know, it's all past stuff. So it's take a look at where you are today. What do you appreciate about where you've been? Because most of the time we're just beating ourselves up for not having started sooner. Like, why didn't I just start trying to have a baby in my 20s? And it's like, what? Huh? Who does that anymore? Right. But the second thing is, what are the gifts that you have gotten from where you've been, right? Because we tend to look at our past as just all the negative stuff. But what about the good that has come? Like, what can you be grateful for from having 2 failed IVFs, right? And most people will be like, what? I'm not happy about that at all. There's nothing I can be grateful for. But my question to them typically is, well, are you sure about that?
Mm-hmm.
Are you sure? Right? Because what if there are adjustments that needed to be made to those protocols? Or what if, let's say, you had done those IVF rounds, but you had never had acupuncture, or you never considered the possibility of bringing in complementary supplements to support your success. They were just doing IVF. Like sometimes those failures are gifts because they were having you pump the brakes a second and say, hey, let's be even better. Let's do some additional things that can help us support that success. And, because my own journey led me down a path that I never would have anticipated. Like I thought I was just going to do IVF, Michelle, and that's all she wrote.
Right.
I wish it was that simple. I was like, you know what? I'm going to start this treatment. I'll be pregnant by May. Right. And that wasn't the case at all. It took me down a very, very long road to discovering so many things. I didn't know about acupuncture. I didn't know about Chinese medicine. I didn't know anything about any of those things. I didn't know about past life regression and all of the crazy things that I did. I mean, quote unquote crazy.
Yeah. Right.
I didn't know about steam in my vagina, but I was doing all of that stuff, and it brought me to the place that I am today. And so, for the women listening, like, hey, if you want to just start somewhere, take an inventory of where you've been on the journey. What did you learn and what can you appreciate from it? Because the negativity and the self-doubt, that's easy. That's the easy part. Challenge yourself to see something bigger. And you may be surprised because by taking the time to look at things like that, you may find opportunities that are right under your nose.
Right. It's true. Like really, really true. And I'm wondering, as you were telling me the story, when you were a prosecutor, you witnessed some really tough things. And I'm wondering, have you made any kind of connection on how that impacted you and how it might have affected you, the stress and the trauma?
I love this question. This is such a good question. I love being able to answer that because I think what that work had done was completely isolate me from the feminine. Mm-hmm. I lived in my masculine energy, Michelle. Mm-hmm. I was in masculine do and protection mode. And I wore lipstick. I wore makeup. I was wearing my Manolo Blahniks to the courtroom and all of this. I had all the external trappings of being in my feminine, but I was not in my feminine energy. I couldn't receive.
Right.
And just like I tell my clients all over the world, I'm like, conceiving is all about receiving. Mm-hmm. And I promise you that I was not able to receive at all. I couldn't receive, support from my colleagues because it was a very it's extremely masculine, it's like, this is the courtroom. You're not shedding any tears, even though you're watching a child, talk about their abuse. Like you have to have such a thick skin. I had rhinoceros skin back then. You had to be completely separated from your emotions and your feelings. It took a long time for me to begin to feel again because I was in such protection mode for so long. Right. And it's interesting because it doesn't surprise me. There were so many women in my office that were quietly getting fertility treatments, but nobody would talk about it because because it showed a chink in your armor, right? It showed a weakness. And in that particular profession, you can't show weakness. There are sharks all around. They smell blood in the water, right? And so, when I think about the trauma that came from doing what I did, and I would do it over and over and over again, all over again, because I was very good at it. Mm-hmm. And my community needed that, and so I would do that for my community. I wouldn't.
That's amazing.
Anything.
I love that.
Yeah. I mean, I would, because they needed me. I was a warrior in a different way.
I could see that though. You have like this warrior energy.
Yeah. And so I know that was my calling for that time in my life. And totally. I also knew it was preparation for what I do today.
Yep.
But I think the part that will most help the women listening is it being so separate from my feminine, not just the energy, but my own physical feminine. Like, all I knew about the female body was, well, I have one. And then, and what I learned from, trying rape cases, I had no appreciation or reverence for my femininity and my, my female parts. Like I just, it was a sad and slightly disturbing, reality that I just didn't know me, Michelle. I didn't know me. I didn't know really who I was truly. I didn't know who I was physically, and I didn't know who I was from a feminine perspective. I look back on those days and I think to myself, I thought I saw the feminine as weak. And it's like, but I'm asking my body to do the most feminine thing that it could possibly do. As biological females, we carry babies, right? I mean, so it was really interesting to me. And part of my fertility journey was also a journey to self. And really, because this pink
hair,
is.
It often is. Yeah.
Yeah. This pink hair did not exist back when I was.
I love the pink hair.
It wasn't
awesome.
It wasn't possible back then. Yeah. But the more, and my husband laughs all the time. He's like, the more you become, the more pink your hair is. And it's like, it started off with like a strand.
So it's great though. It's so you.
Yeah. But that is the point. And it's funny. And that's why I really appreciate the question that you asked, because so many women that I work with, and I see this transformation, and I'm sure you see it as well, where the more this woman becomes herself, the easier it is for her baby to find her. Because my son, so I had my son when I was 43 and a half, naturally, when I gave birth. And when I met him, like face to face, I mean, I knew I honestly believe I knew his soul, before them. But when I met him, and now he's 5, I'm like, of course you're my son. And of course I needed to become this woman that I am today in order to be your mother. Because there were so many things about me that needed to change, Michelle. Like I was so in my ego, I was so in my stories, that I look back on my journey with so much gratitude, because it forced me to change. I can't even imagine mothering this boy with the stories and the hangups and the limitations that I had back then.
Yeah. It's wild how we can see, hindsight is 2020. We can see so clearly when we look from the future back. But in the beginning, when you're going through the journey, there's a lot of unknowns. It really is stepping into that unknown. But like also, my other question is to think about the trauma that you see, or the kids being abused, all the things that are so hard to witness, and that connection subconsciously on how you might feel to bring a child into this world. That was also one of my questions. Like, could that impact? Because I know that sometimes those kind of traumas, or women, I've seen women where their mothers were abused by the father or looked at as weak. So they thought, oh, to be a mother, I really want to become all about my career because I don't want to be like my mom. And you see, just the witnessing that you have throughout your life to things can shut down. And that's one of the reasons why I got into hypnotherapy, because it's so interesting, releasing old emotions or old perspectives, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it totally does. And it's interesting because I see this play out. I mean, I see this play out all the time in my own practice. I mean, I coach a lot of lovably type A, control freaky professional women, as I said, physicians, lawyers, teachers, nurses, engineers, scientists of all kind from all over the world. And we all, like, it just reminds me of the humanity. It doesn't matter how many letters somebody has after their name. If they're hurting, they're hurting.
Totally. Yeah.
Right. And it's like, people have asked me,
So true.
I mean, aren't you intimidated by this? You're coaching a cardiologist or whatever. And I'm like, no, because she's just like me.
Yes.
She's just as effed up as I am, and we're good, and I love it because it also, I think this journey is an invitation to get out of the story on so many levels, because, part of the reason why I mean, I lived like Batman, Michelle. I had an alternate identity when I was on my journey because I would disappear for hours. People thought I was dying because first of all, I wouldn't tell them that I was going for fertility treatment. They just knew I had these doctor's appointments and they're like, is she dying? I mean, and I would have rather had them believe that I was dying than for anybody to find out that I couldn't do something that the crackheads that were coming into the courtroom did quite easily, right? Because I felt like a failure. I'm like, this is a biological basic and I'm not able to do this. But I think that the trauma that comes from living in that world, and I never stopped and said, well, I don't want to bring a child into this world because of this. I was saying to myself, when I bring my son in, I am going to protect him from this. And he's going to know that his mama put a lot of, bad people away, and that we protect children, we protect women, we take care of our community. So that part didn't scare me, but I think some of my jealousy, if I'm 100% honest, was kicking whenever I would see that. I'm like, what? When you've watched a woman testify in a trial against her own child, who is, describing their abuse, like that's what you're like, wow, I never thought I would see that, but you see it. Yeah. And I think for me specifically, it was just a way of me saying, okay, I'm not going to be that, but I'm not going to be that in the best possible way.
Yeah. And it's not even so much that you're consciously thinking yourself that you're going to be like that, or, any of that. But sometimes when you're exposed to things that are so disturbing, it does put a shock to your system on some level, and you may not feel it because you just can't afford to feel it because you have to be a tough attorney and like you got to do your job. So it's interesting just how the mind works, but we still have these like empathetic aspects to us, regardless of how we deal with it. We still on some level internalize. And it's just, it's interesting to see, my husband, he works, it does take a certain personality. He works in the emergency room. He sees all kinds of things, but he's perfect for it because he's able to kind of like compartmentalize and kind of shut it down. But I do feel like sometimes it does drain him on a level that he doesn't realize,
Yeah. Well, because you're in that protection mode. Yeah. And, you think about anybody who is driven, anyone who is a high achiever, it takes a little bit of a dulled sense or a high threshold for pain in order to be able to do that and to do it and be like, well, we just keep plugging along, right? I don't have time to cry. I got stuff to do, right? But eventually that does catch up with you. And that reminds me of Gabor Mate's book, When the Body Says No.
Oh, no, I haven't read that, but that sounds really interesting.
Yeah. And he just came out with a new book recently, but When the Body Says No, I think you and your listeners would really benefit from from reading or listening to that book, because it really describes when the body's like tapping out, like, we're not going any farther. And, the traumas that we keep within. And he's a medical doctor as well, talking about that impact that trauma has on the body and why it's so important to take care of that and to address it, and until when you have a health crisis, to be looking not just at the physical, but really looking at the spiritual and the mental pieces, so that you do cover your bases, mind and body, in that process.
Totally. And I think that there's a big misconception that when you're working on the mindset, it's to not like feel bad, but actually, I'm very big on like Michael Singer, and his book is amazing. And he, The Untethered Soul, where he talks about actually leaning into it, because we always want to resist what we feel. It's actually leaning into it and softening up, which is what you were saying, going into that feminine, softening up and allowing yourself to really process. That's when the body is able to process, and the energy of the emotions can move through and not be held in the cells.
Yeah. And I think, and I love his book, The Surrender Experiment. That was the one that I read from him. And it's interesting how I have a lot of theories about why this is, but it's interesting how we, in a lot of ways, we're told to wrap up our emotions
Mm-hmm.
and not to be in them. And I think it breeds a level of distrust in them. And, some people are afraid of the emotion, or we think it's weak.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, as you had said before, just like surrender is courage, I think being willing to feel the emotion is courageous. But I also think there's a huge difference between allowing for the emotion, feeling for the emotion, but also allowing the emotion to control you. Because I think there's a
True.
point when that becomes something that you don't want it to be. I think that there's kind of a line where that isn't empowerment anymore. It's
No,
stagnation.
I agree. And it's interesting because both that and not and resisting it in the beginning, like they both are stuck. They're both
Yeah.
stuck types of energies. So you're either stuck by not allowing it to process through, but then when you keep it around, you're also stuck. It's all stuck.
Yeah, no.
We want it moving.
Yeah, no, I mean, I love the way that you characterize that, because it's absolutely true. It's absolutely true. And when, in I think something that I was taught a long time ago, which I really go back to all the time, is, you are ultimately in control of what you make something mean,
Mm-hmm.
right? You control the meaning. So, if you're hurting, okay, we acknowledge that you're hurting. You decide, as the mind, you're like, hey, okay, I'm going to hurt for this period of time, and I'm going to hurt. I'm going to let it be messy. I'm going to have my Kardashian cry. I'm going to have all of that, right?
Right.
And then when I'm done, I'm showing my emotion that I am the boss, and I will know when it's done. If I need a few more minutes, or I need a day, or whatever, I will make that decision. But when I'm done, I'm done. I'm
Right.
going to reap the lesson, and then I'm going to move forward.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's, again, not denial, it's
Right.
discernment.
Exactly.
And,
Yeah.
we as sentient beings who have the ability to think and create our reality, we get to pump the brakes on things when we want to pump the brakes, and we can go full throttle when we feel like going full throttle.
Mm-hmm.
But in the end, we're in control.
Yes, that is key. I think that is such a great reminder for the listeners. Really, in the end, we are in control. And I think we have a lot more choice than we realize. That's when you realize, I mean, I'll tell you the truth, like even just in my own journey, and I've had my own challenges, when I did realize that ultimately I am responsible for myself. It's funny because it's kind of like when you take responsibility, you feel like you're submitting, you're kind of giving up, or again, it's the same kind of thing. But when you do that, it's actually the most empowering thing you can possibly do, because then you own it.
100%. Well, and it's funny because people confuse personal responsibility with blame and
Mm-hmm. Oh,
self-flagellation. And
such a
it's
good
like,
point. Oh,
and it's
yes.
like, no, I'm not in the business. Well, I don't believe in victimhood. I
Mm-hmm.
believe that things happen to people, but having tried some of the most gruesome sexual assault cases, in the community at the time, the victims that I represented in court, were such wonderful examples of not being victims.
Mm-hmm.
They had horrific things happen to them. And the strength, it's funny because I actually got an email a few weeks back from a young girl. I mean, she was 14 at the time that we were in court. And now she's off doing amazing things in her life. And she keeps in touch with me. And she was no victim, Michelle. She took
That's
control. Something
incredible.
happened to her. Indeed, we're not, she had terrible things happen to her, but she refused to let a victim mentality take over her life. She took full responsibility for her life and is in a place that, some people who have never had that happen to them are, would dream of being in.
Yeah.
But that speaks to I think, the beauty and the power that we have in us as women and as people to have license and agency over our outcomes.
Yes. Oh my God. Amen to that. Like that's serious empowerment. I mean, and it's just a choice away.
Yeah, it's just, I mean, we're clearly of like mind in that way, but it's like it's hard for people because we've been conditioned to believe that personal responsibility is blame, or that I think the other thing underneath that that's even more powerful is we make mistakes wrong. And
That's
I don't,
true.
yeah, and I don't see it that way. I used to see it that way because you can't make mistakes in the courtroom, not really, because somebody's liberty is at stake. I put so much pressure, but the reality is there isn't. I don't believe in mistakes anymore. I believe in more information.
Hmm.
You're going to get a result from something and it's going to give you more information.
Right.
But making mistakes is a critical aspect of succeeding,
It
because
is.
we will mess things up more than we will get them right. But that makes it, when we do get it right, even more sweet. And, it's like failure. I like to make it a game now. I don't intentionally try to fail, but
Hmm.
when I do, I'm like, okay, what did this teach me? Obviously, I needed to learn it.
Well, the talent code, it's all about that. The book, The Talent Code, it's all about the way that it grows. It grows from obstacles and going through that and falling and failing. Like that's part of it. And that's why I mean, people who are afraid of failing don't really allow themselves that growth, that opportunity to grow. I mean, so people who take it, and when I say people, it could be like your younger self was afraid to fail, and then your older self learned it's okay, or at different times of your life, because it is a choice. Again, this is a choice. It's not who you are as a person. It's not a personality thing. It's absolutely a choice.
Yeah. Yeah. And when I think about the women listening, and if they're in a place where they're like, when is this baby coming? I've been on this journey for X number of years. I've had X number of failures. What I like to encourage women to remember is that every time you fail, quote unquote, you're getting one step closer, and you're going to be that much more prepared. And you're going to be, I mean, because so many of the lessons, Michelle, that I learned on my journey and who I had to become, I used all those lessons in the first year of my son's life. I'm like, oh my gosh, I remember, like I remember leaving the house, completely forgetting to pack, something, whatever it was. And my first inclination was to go to beat myself up. I'm like, what kind of a mother does this? Who does that? And then I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. A new mom does this.
Right.
A woman who has not mommed before does this. And so instead of tormenting myself after that initial like 45 seconds of freak out, I'm like, oh, okay. This was for me. This is a
Yes.
message that I needed to get. And so I think that, the mind piece not only supports women pre-conception, but also during the pregnancy and then during motherhood. It's something. Mindset is the gift that keeps on giving.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's like, absolutely. Because when people going on the fertility journey, they don't realize just how much they're preparing for actual parenthood, motherhood.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's funny because my book's coming out this week, The Fearless Pregnancy.
Oh, congratulations.
It's my third book. And so basically, I was answering the question, well, what happens after, right? Like what happens after you get that positive pregnancy test? Because we'll fantasize, Michelle, about all of these things, about there'll be a marching band and a parade coming through our front door, the day we get our positive pregnancy test. But mindset doesn't end at that point. It only gets more important, because especially if you've been trying to conceive for years, then our brain naturally goes to survival mode and says, well, what if something happens?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
What if,
happens all the time. Yep.
Yeah. Or people, we also have this magical 12-week number in our head. Oh, if I just get past 12 weeks, but the reality is the goalpost moves all the time. We'll go from 12 weeks to the 19-20-week anatomical scan. Then from when our baby's lungs are fully formed and they could, survive out of the womb. I mean, we're doing all this stuff. And it's like, look, you can make your pregnancy blissful, or you can make it as miserable as you were prior to working on your mindset when you were trying to conceive. I just highly encourage you to make it blissful because you worked hard to get there.
Oh my God, such words of wisdom. I love it. I could talk to you for hours because you're very like-minded. We have similar interests, obviously. And
we'll be talking more, Michelle.
Yes, we will for sure. And I love your background. It's so colorful it like matches your hair. I love it.
Yes, a little bit of branding there.
I
Yeah.
love it. So if people do want to set up a call and work with you, how can they find you?
Well, I always encourage women to go to my podcast, the Fearlessly Fertile podcast. And we have 197 episodes as of this recording. So to go through, pick one, trust themselves. It's like spinning the wheel.
Yeah, I love that.
And take a listen because women always tell me that they find the right episode at the right time, all the time. And there's loads of women on there who have beaten the odds. So I encourage women to, and that's a free resource, is go listen to the podcast. See if that lands with you. But, the other ways that women can find me is I've now written 3 books. My first book is Am I the Reason I'm Not Getting Pregnant? The Fearlessly Fertile Method for Clearing the Blocks Between You and Your Baby. They can check that out. I also have lots of cool free stuff they can download on my website, which is www.frommaybe2baby.com. That's TO spelled out, or they can just do a internet search Rosanne Austin and it'll come up. Probably some foul mouth rant at some point, but that's just, 10 years in the courtroom will make you a little salty. But yeah, those are the best ways for women to find me and to get started in the work.
And I'll have all of the information actually in the episode notes if anybody wants to go there to find it. And Rosanne, this is awesome. You are so much fun. I love you. I just immediately connect with your energy and just you as a person and as a warrior, really. And thank you so much for all that you do for the community. And thank you so much for coming on today.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. And, I really love, having conversations like this with other like-minded women who really, I think, encourage people to find the power within themselves to overcome on this journey, because you have a big mission on your heart. I always tell my ladies that the desire on their heart to be a mom, it's there because it was meant for them.
Yes.
And if they could just tap into that and allow even in me saying that, if there was any resonance in your body as you're hearing me say that, it's because you can tell truth when you hear it. So, yes. Thank you for having me, Michelle, and we'll keep this conversation going.
Oh, for sure. So that concludes today's episode. You can find all of the links mentioned on the episode notes. If you're enjoying these episodes, please take a moment to share and leave a review. Reviews mean everything to podcasters, and I really enjoy hearing from my listeners. You can also find me on my website at www.thewholesomelotus.com or email me at info@thewholesomelotus.com. I love hearing from my listeners. If you're interested and want updates as well as a free ebook on my top 10 fertility boosting habits, you can visit my fertility page on www.thewholesomelotus.com. I thank you so much for listening in and hope that you have a beautiful day.